Thank you. Uh, I'm really delighted that the organizers decided to have a session on coffee. And I think my suggestion is that this should be a track in every Bangalore Lit Fest. Every Bangalore Lit Fest, you need to have a coffee track discussing coffee because I think that brings this city together in so many ways than, the boring things like IT and space and, biotech and all of that. Coffee is the real Bangalore and brings us all together, especially when it's by two. So uh, what we'll do is, Kaveri has a fantastic book. I had the pleasure of reading it earlier this week. And although it has a very weighty title called The History of Coffee in India, it's a very, very readable book. So you can pick it up and read it while you're drinking coffee. It doesn't feel like you're reading a deep academic, boring kind of thing. It's very, very racy, right? So I urge you to pick it up after the session at the bookstore, and she'll be available to sign it after that, right? So let me just start by asking Kaveri, who's a medical doctor, the third batch of St. John's Medical College in Bangalore, which he said, and worked for the Tatas for several years. Why a book on coffee?
I never really planned to write this book. I worked for Tata's, as you know, for about nearly 10 years. I used to be in charge of the plantation hospitals, first in Tamil Nadu and then in Karnataka. But I had finished with that. And one fine day, they asked if I would, they called me to the office and I was asked whether I would write a book on coffee. And my immediate thing was, sorry, I can't do this because that's not what I do. I don't write books. I'm basically, in my writing, I mainly write fiction, novels, and I also write certain books on medical themes. So I was not happy to do it. So I told them, okay, I'll think about it, but I was not planning. But then, there was, it went back and forth, and finally I agreed to do it, because on one condition, that I would be allowed to do a book which was, independent, not because they had asked me to do it. In the sense, it was not going to be a book to promote coffee in that sense. It was going to be the history. And naturally, with the history, the period of Tatas would come. But I didn't want to write a book only on, on the company or something. Okay. So they gave me a free hand, and that's how I started writing. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get to that history, because we have only about half an hour. We actually have half an hour to do this. So I want to sort of race ahead. So we're all familiar with the popular history of coffee in India, which starts with Baba Budan going to Yemen, stealing 7 beans, because the Yemenis wouldn't give real fresh beans. They would only give roasted beans because they didn't want competition. So Baba Budan, who's a Sufi saint from Karnataka, goes up there, steals 7 beans, brings them to Karnataka, and he starts growing them. So that's the popular mythological history of how coffee started in India. But what I want to talk about is the very interesting story of coffee in the Mysore state and in Kodagu in the 19th century. And that's the most fascinating part of the book. So maybe you could tell us that story?
Coffee, from what I have read, and I read a lot to try and find out, after Baba Budan brought coffee, it slowly became something that could be, brewed and drunk. It became popular in local areas, and he grew a few shrubs of coffee, and similarly, a lot of his neighbors began to grow coffee in their backyards. Just a few shrubs, so that they could have this berry, and then they could make the drink. So that became more and more popular as a drink, and people began to grow more and more coffee. But it was all independent farmers, peasants, who were growing coffee. And from that area where he was in Chikmagalur district, the concept of growing coffee came down. It spread, it was in Chikmagalur, Hassan region, because that is also a very good area, the moist soil, the sun and the rain, everything is, very good for coffee. So the tradition came down to Coorg, and Coorg itself being very similar in weather conditions and peasantry being there. So they also took to it, similarly in a very simple farmer's backyard growing coffee. So coffee was really being grown by people and not by companies. It was never thought of as a commercial product. That never came to anybody's mind. And when the British annexed Coog in 1834, and they came, when they, maybe about 20 years later, the British who came down to Coog to work, in official capacity, or who decided to buy some land there, they found that this would be a good thing to do. So they started growing coffee too. And they had much more, facilities and the ability to get people to work for them. So they could afford to have bigger coffee, growing gardens, coffee. And it was even later, some years later, that one of the British, not planters, one of the British men who felt that why not commercialize this? Why not commercialize this? Joy, I think. And he decided, he put it up to his little company and in England, and it was accepted, and then it was made into a commercial product. They said the best way to do this, because already they knew that coffee had become popular in Europe, first of all in the countries of Arabia and in all parts of Europe. Coffee was very popular, although it was called the devil's drink and evil drink, but it was very popular. And so the British commercialized, and they decided to cut down forests where possible, have wide estates where they could grow coffee. And that's how coffee became a commercial product.
Yeah, so I just want to connect this, what she was saying, to a session which happened here about at 2 o'clock, where they was talking about the peasant rebellion in Kodagu and Dakshina Kannada. And that's very closely related to the coffee thing, because when the British annexed and took control of these parts, they changed the way taxes were paid. So earlier taxes were paid in terms of share of the produce. So I think there's 1 mound per, I forget the units, but if you had 100 kgs of coffee, you had to give 5 kgs of coffee as tax. But somewhere around the 1830s, the British came, they changed the tax from coffee to rupees. So you had to pay for every 100 rupees that you earn, maybe 5 rupees of. So that change, that administrative change, caused the rebellion. So those of you who were here for the 2 o'clock session, the connection between the coffee story and the rebellion story is exactly that. The British changed the tax and the administrative structure, and there was the first rebellion that happened, part of which is due to coffee. The second is, and I read through a reference from her book, is that the Mysore kingdom had given a monopoly on the trading of coffee to a British firm. And that became a source of political discomfort among the Mysore, the local population and the British. And then there was politics around coffee, which played out in the court of Mysore also. So a lot of intersection of coffee and politics in the Mysore kingdom in the 19th century. Right? Now let's come to more, let's just jump right up, right? So we were talking about specialty coffee and how the Tatas were instrumental in bringing India in a way from traditional coffee to the modern way of doing coffee. So you want to tell us something about that?
Yeah, to talk about that, I like to go back also to when coffee became popular as a drink in India, really at the beginning of the 20th century. It was only in the early 1900s when the British were already drinking coffee, and the Indians saw them drink, and there was this mid-morning coffee or after lunch coffee or after dinner. There were all sorts of things. It was all very sophisticated and stylish. And the first people to pick up the coffee drinking habit were the Brahmins. And the Brahmins of Tamil Nadu particularly, they took to coffee in a big way. And they learned to make this filter coffee, and which they loved.
The Kumbakonam degree coffee.
Yes, degree coffee. I mean, they just got, you can say, addicted to it. You couldn't go into a Brahmin home without this. And it was a sort of a status symbol also. So while the workers and the ordinary class drank kanji, what we call in Kannada, they drank, only the wealthier people, and particularly the Brahmins, drank coffee. And from the Brahmins, it came to other wealthy Indians. And when the workers wanted to drink coffee, that there was a lot of outrage, and they were not allowed into cafes or anywhere. It would say that you can't, such and such people cannot come in here. It's only for Brahmins. So, and that had to be fought, and it was, I think, at the time of I think in the 1940s or so, when the Periyar movement, during the Periyar movement, E.V. Ramaswamy's movement, when he started the Self-Respect Party, and he said, who says we can't drink, the others can't drink it. And although he was, I think, a Brahmin, but, they walked into a restaurant and they said, you have to serve us coffee. And they, broke down the barriers. And that was evidently supported by the Congress leaders of the time and by Mahatma Gandhi, who said that everybody should be allowed. So it was sort of also a part of our freedom struggle was tied to coffee drinking. And as we were talking, the coffee drinking for a long time remained in South India. South India loves good coffee and makes good coffee. And when you go to the north, you sneer at the coffee they give you.
Because instant coffee, Nescafe.
Yes, they give you, and they'll put so little coffee and they'll say, it's strong coffee, that type of thing. So all that happened. And finally, we've come to the stage where coffee, I think after there was a sort of especially the COVID era, but even before the COVID era, once Starbucks came to India, for instance, and places like Coffee Days started off, people got interested in making coffee a sort of a drink which is a social drink, like you meet your friend, meet your girlfriend over a cup of coffee, and sit for a long time talking. So, or people take their laptops and go. And that became a trend, and that caught up. And I think post-COVID now, it has really reached a height where coffee is very popular also in North India, and you find the good coffee cafes all over India. And so and people buy quality coffee. Nitin is a coffee specialist in the type of coffee he drinks and prepares. So he will probably be able to talk more about it. But it has become very popular. People are very discerning and very careful about the type of coffee they buy and the way they make it also. And so the plantations themselves are paying a lot of attention to growing, for instance, organic coffee or specialty coffees, with this right type of soil, texture, the humidity in the air, everything, so many things concerned.
Yeah, and in the consumption of coffee in Bangalore, you see two different but very strong traditions, right? There's one tradition of drinking South Indian filter coffee, where you would go to MTR or Mayas or the Darshinis, and it's very important to get that coffee about 80 to 100 ml with froth on top and the decoction poured on top. And a lot of us are really, really passionate about drinking that. And at the same time, especially after Cafe Coffee Day and Siddhartha's contribution to coffee in India, Cafe Coffee Day changed the scene, right? Yes. And again, it starts again in Bangalore. Yes. You have really modern cafes, and very well appointed. This is, 15 years ago? Yes. And long before Starbucks came. And it sort of single-handedly changes or brings this new coffee culture in terms of consumption into the country, including the paper bags and all of that. Yes. And now you have the third wave as it is. How do you see this? And I especially want to bring the Tata angle in because you were there. What's the Tata's contribution to the story?
One of Tata's contribution is that they were probably the only large company which, one of the main contributions of Tata's is that it was the only large company which grew coffee, they picked it, dried it, cured it, packaged it, and sold it. They did the entire thing. while a lot of other companies will buy coffee and then process it and make instant coffee or package it and sell. So Tata's went into plantations in a big way. And they're going into plantations, I mean, coffee plantations, as you know, has a dual effect. It brings in work. People get, work. And I think places like Kodagu and Chikmagalur, the economy thrives a lot on the plantations. But at the same time, large plantations destroy environment. Because they do use, fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, they destroy the soil. So the long-term effects of plantations are also something that people are now thinking about and trying to move towards better methods. That is there. And Tatas themselves, because as time goes, families which work of laborers in coffee estates, but their children do not want to work in the estates, which is a wonderful thing because they get good education. The Tatas looks after their, helps them with education, their homes, livelihood. So they do, get good education, they move out. So they don't want to be daily wage earners. They move on. So as through the years, the number of people who want to work in coffee estates has drastically reduced. And we now get from, of course, the Northeast and from Orissa and Bihar, but they're not used to plantation labor, so they're not very good at it, either coffee picking or climbing, various things that are involved. But Tatas themselves are now concentrating a lot more on processing and marketing and growing quality coffees. I think that has become a very important segment for them. The marketing of coffee, producing niche coffees that can be exported. Of course, there's a large percent of the coffee we grow in India is exported. So after we fill our needs in India, but it is perhaps as the tastes of people in India also evolve, we are probably going to see more of specialty coffees, which is not to say that we won't have the ordinary, simple coffee that we can also get for 10 rupees or whatever. And Nescafe will still be drunk. Instant coffee will still be drunk. There are a lot of people who prefer, even now. In fact, the number of people who drink instant coffee, I believe, is more than the number of people who drink brewed coffee.